So today, what does it mean to be an ambassador? Has anybody ever thought about being an ambassador? I mean, you think about a world map here and you look around. I would go for Australia. It seems minimal. I wouldn't have to learn a language. I could just have a good time there. It's kind of Southern California maybe 40 years ago. Anybody ever read the book In a Sunburned Country by Bill Bryson? He spends 3 or 4 weeks touring around Australia. It's an amazing book. It's a lot of fun to read. But any nominees here, other places that you might consider on the map? What's that?
Australia.
You like Australia too? New Zealand. Yeah. Hawaii. Wait a minute, they're part of us. We're talking about a foreign country here. Nice try. My son was part of an Emmanuel Faith group here that went about 4 or 5 years ago over to Portugal. And he said it was wonderful. It was Southern California, slightly east. So he had a good time there. Any place on here you look at and you say, please, dear Lord, don't send me as an ambassador.
Missouri.
I missed that one. What?
Missouri.
What a tough crowd.
Southern Sudan.
Southern Sudan. For me, it'd be any of the stands up there. You know, it used to be part of Soviet Union. I have no idea. I don't think they're very stable, and I don't think they're very friendly. So, no thanks. How about the Scandinavian countries? That might be kind of cool, huh? Nice place to be. So we're going to be talking today about being an ambassador. So I wanted to start with the literal ambassadors that we know about, people that go from one country to the next. And it ties in, doesn't it, with 2 Corinthians. Paul used this as a metaphor to say, well, that's what we are. Not literally, but in a spiritual sense. In 2 Corinthians 5:20, he says this, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. So we're going to come back to that verse in a minute. So what would you say is the job of an ambassador? Yes, they go to another country. What do they do? What's the point?
Represent their country.
Yeah, they are a physical representation. In fact, the embassy is considered a piece of that country, isn't it? So you can't go in and run your own laws there. It's a piece of foreign territory. So you go represent your country. You hope to maybe clear up any misconceptions people have. You show up as a representative at different kinds of events, and you try to learn, I assume, something about that country. There's all those stories of dirty, ugly Americans that go in, don't understand anything about the customs or the habits of the language, and just sit there in their fancy embassy. So you don't want something like that. Here's what we're going to do for today, and this is where your outline comes in. We're going to talk about 3 aspects of ambassadorship. And it applies both to the physical world of ambassadors, the political world, and it applies to the spiritual world as well. Knowledge, wisdom, and character. So we're going to split those into 3 sections here today. If you're going to be a good ambassador, you need these 3 things. 2 of the 3 are pretty good, but 3 out of 3 would be wonderful if we get a good ambassador. So let's take a look at knowledge. And I would say you need 2 pieces of knowledge. You need to know something about your own country. So you're sitting there in Oslo, Norway, you're sitting Nairobi, you're sitting Singapore, and questions are going to come, aren't they? People are going to ask you questions. And I would say in the next 2 or 3 weeks, if you're an ambassador in a foreign country and they come and they say, what's with the election? Now, we've all sat through that, and they may even have questions about what in the world is this electoral college? A lot of people don't understand that at all, and they're upset. They say, well, Hillary won the popular vote. Yes, but, and then we have to go into an explanation of the electoral college, and once you explain it, people are going to say, what's it for? Why would they set up something like that? So we're not doing that today. I don't want to go down that road, but you can see you need to understand something about your own country when you're going places. But you better understand the nation you're going to. I don't know. I'm hoping ambassadors get some kind of crash course on the country they go to. I don't know if they do. And as Christians, we're going to do the same 2 things. So let's take that first area of knowledge, and we'll split it into 2 ways. Knowledge that we need to know of our country, in this case it would be Christianity, and the knowledge we would need to know about the secular world, the outside world that's the non-Christian world. So let's start with the knowledge we ought to have as Christians. And I'm going to talk resources for a few minutes. I bet a lot of you already can nod your head. You have these resources, and if you don't, something to think about. Some are just having study Bibles. plenty of good ones out there. I just picked one that I like. It has to do with apologetics. So, but there are tons of good study Bibles available, and Bible commentaries. They can get pricey, but you can buy them used. This one is just a single volume commentary, and we've dug into it occasionally to find out what's going on in this verse here. Then you have good introduction to the Bible books, handbooks. I assume a lot of you have handbooks. I mean, just look at some of the things they cover. It's accents the Bible's broader ethical and theological teachings, outlines, commentaries, photos, illustrations, charts, maps. Boy, if there's one single really good resource, it might be something like a Bible handbook. Does that name sound familiar, Mark Strauss? Just a bit. Mark is Pastor Strauss's son, a wonderful professor right here in the San Diego area. He's been at the church. He's come and spoken to the entire group on apologetics issues, to the whole church. And Mark has this book out. If you want to focus on the Gospels, in fact, that might be something of interest to your class here, because I know you went through Tim Keller's work in the past. Well, Mark Strauss has this book called Four Portraits, One Jesus. And now it's so popular and it's done so well that the publisher has put together a package, and maybe you can see, handbook, textbook, video lectures, laminated sheet, and interactive workbook. So the whole class could go through it. But if you just wanted the book, it's an excellent book, just focusing on the Gospels. If you want more enrichment as far as why is Matthew different than Mark? What about some of the differences? John seems different than the other three. The other three are called synoptic Gospels. Why are they different? When were they written? What are the broad themes? What are the specific things that each of them are trying to get across? And then, of course, apologetics. Again, I'm going to start with just some basics. If you want something pretty simple, a guy named Paul Little since passed away, but his books continue to sell like crazy because he has two good ones. Know what you believe, that'd be the theology, and know why you believe, which is this one, which is apologetics. Very small, easy to read, and it'll give you a real quick, good run-through of why should we trust the Gospels, for instance. Why do we think that Jesus really lived? Why would we trust in the resurrection story? Why would we believe there's a God? So he covers it really, really well. If you're dealing with neighbors and co-workers who have a different religion, the one on the right might be good. It's called So What's the Difference? And it looks at major religions and different sects that sound kind of Christian. And he takes a look at what are their beliefs, and how does it differ from Christianity? Because many times groups like the Mormons paper over the differences, don't they? They'll say another gospel of Jesus. And they'll even use the same words. They'll talk about salvation. Well, salvation to them is very, very different. And so that's an excellent book as well. By the way, you don't need to write these things down. I can send you all the notes if you want with all the names of these books. Somebody had a question back there.
I just want to know the last name. Chris's last name.
This one? Ridenour, R-I-D-E-N-O-U-R, Ridenour. How about some other apologetics books that get into specific issues that you might be interested in? The resurrection is the cornerstone of Christianity, isn't it? And so the two leading scholars and authorities today are these two men up here, Gary Habermas. You can just go to his website, garyhabermas. Don't hold me to this, I think it's .com. But he is the leading expert on the resurrection. He is amazing. He has devoted his whole life. He's a professor, but he makes it very accessible. It's not esoteric, confused, professorial talk. It's down to earth, but he tells you why we can trust in the resurrection. A powerful book. Mike Licona is also an excellent person to write it together. It's called The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. If you want kind of I guess we'd say an overview of apologetics, but more in depth than Paul Little's book, the one on the right is probably, if you could just put one apologetics book up on your bookshelf, this is it. Great title, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And he covers everything. Existence of God, why do we believe there's truth, why do we believe there's real morality, what about Jesus, his life, can you trust the Gospels? It's a rich, rich book. Heavy going in some places, but it's well worth it. Then I wanted to focus on a person that was one of my favorites. He's been here to Emmanuel Faith several years ago. Anybody have a chance to see him? Jim Wallace. Did you like what he had to say?
Great speaker.
Oh, he's a former cold case detective. He's been featured on Frontline, is it? Dateline. He's been featured there. He never loses. He just retired, but he's never lost a case as a cold case detective. He goes out, he does the hard work when the trail is cold, and he gets his person, whoever it happens to be. So from that perspective, from a detective's perspective, he looks in the book on the left, he looks at the Gospels. Can you trust the Gospels? He looks at it from the perspective of a cold case detective, because this is a cold case. This is 2,000 years ago. And so it's fascinating. People said, wow, what a new way of looking at things. He tells the things that you would ask in a court regarding eyewitnesses, for example. He matches that up with the reports from the New Testament. Can we trust them to be eyewitness reports? And so it's fascinating how he does that. Well, that book just scored big. People loved it to death. He's extremely busy now. He's all over the world. You can go to his website, coldcasechristianity.org or com, again, not sure. Anyway, because of that success, he said, I want to do some more work. So he put out a second book. It's been out maybe 2 years now. It's called God's Crime Scene. This time he looks at evidence for God. So it's a little bit bigger target than just the Gospels. So he looks at things like what's going on in the universe, design, why is there consciousness, where do we get the idea of morality? Things that are easy to talk to with co-workers again, and neighbors and friends. And again, it's a powerful book, really well done. Comes at it again from the idea of a detective. In fact, the title, he says, if you have a crime, well, let's say you have a victim, somebody's lying there dead. It's either a case of it happened in the room. You can find the cause inside the room. For example, illness or suicide with a note or something like that. But it may be that you can't pin it on anything inside the room and the cause is outside the room. In other words, some attacker, some aggressive person came in and beat the person up or killed them or shot them or did something like that. So he says, what do we have if we consider the universe the room? Can we pretend, can we believe that everything in the universe happened because of stuff in the universe? And he says, no, not at all. That there's an outside force that's created this universe and that's kept it organized and has brought consciousness and has brought morality. And he says, of course, that's God. So that's where he gets the title, God's Crime Scene. Ones that they put out in little 6-packs that you can just throw around like candy at Halloween are two of Lee Strobel's books, The Case for Faith and The Case for Christ. And you're nodding your head.
Yeah, when you were talking about the cold case Christianity, his approach to it mirrored so much of Lee Strobel's journey.
Oh yeah, Strobel was a hardcore atheist journalist for the one of the Chicago newspapers, and he took his journalistic skills. His wife became a Christian. He was so amazed at the change in her life. He said, well, there must be something to this, but I'm not sure. I'm going to investigate. As a crime, especially a crime journalist, so he investigated it. Became a Christian. He said, wow, he had no idea there's that much evidence. And in these books and other books that he's got, he goes out to experts, because he says, I'm not the expert. So he goes out and he talks to experts. And he says, and he asks them hard questions. Why would you say this? How do you know that? And these books are powerful and really well done. They become classics in the area of Christian apologetics. And of course, you know Tim Keller because you went through Keller's book. He's probably he's the C.S. Lewis of today, I think. He can take the skeptic and the person who's kind of hostile to Christianity and disarm them. He comes across warm, personable, and kind. And his book is excellent. It became a New York Times bestseller. Can you imagine that? A book talking about the reasons for the existence of God became a New York Times bestseller. Amazing. All right, so we've covered the first part. Knowledge involves understanding your country. If you're an ambassador, your country is Christianity, so you need to know that. But after all, if you go out into the world, you've got to understand what's making people tick out there today. And most of us understand basics because we're working and we see our co-workers and we deal with people who are not Christians. But if you want something that gives you a better overall view of the secular world, I love this magazine called World. Anybody in here subscribe to World? Okay, 2 or 3 of you. You guys with me on that? You like it? Think of it as a Christian Time magazine. So it covers politics, sure. It covers current events. It covers movies. It covers philosophy, anything that's coming along, sports. I mean, it just covers everything. And it comes out bi-weekly, every 2 weeks. And it's a really excellent source. So there's knowledge. But we got wisdom and we've got character. So let's talk wisdom for just a minute. How would you define wisdom? It's different than knowledge, isn't it? Trace.
Knowing how to apply knowledge.
Yeah, moving the knowledge from up here into making it work for you, right? So we're talking wisdom. I like Proverbs 1 that was talking about kind of setting the table before the Proverbs start happening. It says this, The Proverbs of Solomon for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what's right and just and fair. And that takes thought, doesn't it? Knowledge doesn't necessarily give you those kinds of qualities. You can be wise, I mean, you can have knowledge, but you may not be prudent, for example. We know a lot of people like that, don't we? Plenty of head knowledge, but they do some really, they just make poor judgments. So let's talk wisdom for a couple of minutes. I want to focus on maybe some aspects, certainly not all aspects, but just things that we want to encourage in our own life. Think about World War II as an example as we start in on this. The Allies have to figure out what to do with their resources. They don't have unlimited resources. Hitler has taken over the center of Europe. And so do you realize they don't just run a bunch of ships and a bunch of men over there and just say, let's just attack something. Instead, they're really careful. They go to North Africa first, hit them where they're not as strong, and then they go into Italy. And then you get D-Day, and you get the Russians pushing from the east. So there's a lot of thought given to how do we marshal our resources? How do we use these things effectively? That's strategy and tactics. So we're going to spend a few minutes on strategy and tactics here. First skill, I love Dilbert anyway, but first skill that we ought to develop, and you'd think we'd be okay in that. Everybody can hear, we all have the ability to hear, but we're not good listeners in many cases. Perfect example, Dilbert's boss, worst person in the world, is talking to Dilbert, and I don't know if you can read it back there, but the boss says, tell me again what the issue is. Dilbert says, well, do you want the simple but misleading explanation or the one you won't understand? Boss says, either one's good, I wasn't planning on listening. Okay, we don't want to be like the boss. What's the value of really good listening skills? Well, it keeps everything calm, doesn't it? If we're intent on being aggressive and offensive and pushing our point, we're going to create that conflict. We're going to get those shields going up. We listen, and that calms everything down. At least you hope it does. It can diffuse some tough situations. And it allows us to feel compassion. These are fellow creatures made in the image of God. They have value to God. They're not there to be conquest. We talked about that last week. We're not out on a gunslinging mission to shoot people down. And if we listen, we can hear the pain sometimes, and we can understand what they're saying. And I hope it helps us understand whatever the issue is. So good listening skills. Well, how do we improve our listening skills? How about real quick prayers when you're in the middle of a conversation? I'm not talking about sitting home by yourself. Obviously, you pray there. But you're in the middle of a conversation. Something comes up that is a comment on Christianity. Just a quick prayer would be good to say, help me be a good listener, even before I open my mouth. Did we talk last week about Job? Because I always think Job is the prime example. If you read the first chapter or two of Job, he has all these terrible things happen to him. And his friends come, and they just sit with him for an extended period of time, don't they? Before they open their mouths. The minute they open their mouths, they've destroyed everything. The rest of the book, it's just ruination what they do. They don't understand anything. But at first, they were there for him, and they just sat in the dust and just shared the misery and probably listened to some of his complaints. Well, that's probably far more effective than what they did when they tried to understand the issue. Maybe, I'll just say this is where I really failed, is the second one up here. Oftentimes when I'm hearing somebody start in on something, I'm already working on an answer. Does that sound familiar? That's not good listening, is it? I have to say, hold on. I need to really hear this person out before I come up with an answer. God's with us. The Holy Spirit is with us. If He wants us to, He'll help us get a good answer. We need to just listen to what it is they're saying before we say, well, that's a stupid thing. I got to remind me to do this, that. Let's just listen to them. How about the third step there? Making sure we really understand. Sometimes there's just a misunderstanding. We're not really sure exactly what they said, and we launch on something, and that isn't what they had a question about. So we can say, could you go through that again? What are you telling me? Give it to me in a sentence. Or we say it to them. We say, is this what you're saying? Is this the point that you're bringing up? Okay, good. Now we got clarification. We can go from there. We talked about this last week. Another part of good wisdom skills would be not only listening, but being able to ask good questions. Remember when we talked about those? These are the two key questions. What do you mean by that? That's clarification. And the second one is, okay, now I get it. I understand what you're saying. Why do you say that? What's your proof? What's your point? Support it. So we know those are two key things. They're useful over and over again. And we talked about the the value of it, but I'm going to move along here. So we had this, I think, illustrated last week. Let's just do one example maybe for time here. Somebody says, I believe in evolution. Could you ask the first question, what do you mean? The problem is evolution is a pretty fuzzy term. There are all sorts of kinds of evolution. One might be just change over time. If that's all a person means, we have no disagreement. We're on the same page. Okay, I believe in that. Emmanuel Faith has changed. Cars change. People change. That's not an issue. We don't need to tap dance all over them if that's all they mean. But maybe they mean the molecules to man theory, the single cell, moving and changing and species changing, and here we are today thanks to evolution. Well, then that's probably an issue we want to talk about and deal with. The Gospels are a bunch of stories created by early Christians. So what's the problem? I'm not sure I understand. Are they saying it's fabricated? Because they are stories in the sense they're narratives, but we need definitions, don't we? What do you mean it's a story? That's been made up. Okay, so you're saying the Gospels are fiction. Then we got a conversation that we can go with. How about another piece of wisdom? When people make charges aimed at us, are they really aimed at us? Are they upset at us? Who's the target? If they say things like, oh, you're so narrow-minded, or that's really unloving. Are we the ones that came up with these ideas? Are we the ones that said, you have to believe in Jesus, or did Jesus come up with this? Jesus is the one that came up with this. We're not inventing Christianity. Jesus invented Christianity. So who's the target? Who's the one they're really after? We don't need to take offense. We don't need to feel like we've been belittled. Their target is Jesus. Now, he can take care of himself. I don't worry about him. So I think that's good to kind of keep in mind, a little bit of wisdom there.
Before you move off that point,
Yeah.
maybe if I go back to it, maybe it's these statements are made up from a certain vantage point. Because being narrow-minded and loving implies things like, if you're thinking about salvation and saving you from sin, the idea that these statements come out of is, see if I can explain this, is the idea that, why are you saying that having sin, your definition of having sin needs to be removed, and this is the narrow-minded idea. If the vantage point is sin is a poison that destroys anything that's alive, then it's coming in as an idea that is loving because God's trying to remove it. It's not being narrow-minded, it's being minded on reality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it seems like you have a different vantage point. This turns from unloving to absolute loving.
Well, I'm with you. I think, for example, let's take homosexuality. Isn't that the word today is you're a homophobe? You fear homosexuals, which is the idea of hatred. And so Christianity has taken a real black eye in that way. But I think Eric's onto something there, because I think we can say to them, we don't fear homosexuals, we are afraid for them because it's a terrible lifestyle. And same thing with transgenderism. We covered that in our apologetics class. It's an awful lifestyle. There's a high suicide rate. People are depressed. Any surgeries that they undergo, it doesn't help them at all. Is that what you're talking about here? That we need to change the dialogue. That we're not saying this you're a bad person because of it. That we're fearful for you. This lifestyle is not going to be so good.
Yeah, it's not recognizing what sin actually is.
Yeah. Well, even the term sin doesn't go over big today, does it? So sometimes we maybe want to change our terminology as we're dealing with people, but the only thing I was trying to point out by this is many of the things directed to us, we don't need to take offense, we don't need to be upset. They're really targeting Jesus, who said these things. He made a very narrow statement. He said, I'm the truth. I'm the way. Nobody gets to the Father except by me. We didn't invent that. That's from Jesus. So their argument is really with Jesus more so than with us. Trace?
Also, Eric's viewpoint, we can say, okay, well, we can show them how we're not so narrow-minded, but there's another approach to say, well, it's not necessarily wrong to be narrow-minded, because if you think I can step off a tall building and I can do something other than fall, well, then you should be a little more narrow-minded. Realize, no, that is what is going to happen to you.
Yeah.
So there isn't anything necessarily wrong in being narrow-minded if being narrow-minded helps you differentiate truth from falsehood.
Yeah. Again,
reality minded.
Yeah, that's probably a better way of saying it, because narrow-minded has such a negative connotation attached to it.
yeah, that's true. I'll keep moving if that's okay here. Third area. So we got knowledge, we got wisdom, putting that knowledge into practice and thinking about our skills at listening and things like that. What about our character? I would like to be known for those comments below the line as opposed to the comments above the line. And again, Christianity often gets labeled unfairly, I think, but there are some Christians, unfortunately, that are on the top half of that line. Look at the words: arrogant, hostile, hateful, defensive, judgmental, rude. It's out there. And so we want to check ourselves and make sure we're underneath gracious, joyful, faithful, forgiving, honest, and things like that. I just want to hit a couple of, obviously there are plenty of things that would be involved as far as good character development, but how about just a few of them? Holiness. That's not really a popular concept much anymore. But we do not look to those around us to set the standard of holiness. You notice that's really easy to do. Well, at least I'm not Hitler. That's a great standard. You hear that in the non-Christian world, but I think even us, we as Christians sometimes say, well, I don't do those kinds of things. I'm living a little better life than so-and-so. Really? Is that our standard? No. It says we look to God. Be ye holy as I am holy. Wow, that's quite a standard, huh? How about humility? I think people misunderstand humility. It's a great character trait. I think C.S. Lewis captured it pretty well. He said, humility is not thinking less of yourself. You're not a worm. You're made in the image of God. You've got great value to God. So it's not so much thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Isn't that nice? I like that a lot. How about part of our character is building relationships? I love apologetics, but I think in a lot of cases people see it as head knowledge and you just go up to somebody and just lay a bunch of data on them and think you've done your job. But honestly, don't good things come out of relationships? You need to know the people. You need to get to understand them and then begin to talk to them about things that are close to your heart and close to their heart. So words like community, trust, respect, confidence, honesty, dialogue. It takes time. I don't know of any shortcut for this. It just takes a lot of time to get a good relationship going. One more thing. How about respect? Gracious, gentleness, and respect are all words used by the biblical writers to help guide Christians in their dealings with those who don't believe as they do. We did a verse last week, 1 Peter's verse, about whatever you do it with respect. And again, these are not people out there who are targets. These are not people who are enemies. We've had an election. A lot of people have gotten pretty riled up about this. There are no enemies here. We're all in the image of God. And so we want to treat others with respect and gentleness. So, our message as an ambassador, let's go back. This time I want to give you the full picture of what Paul was saying, because if we're an ambassador, we're often carrying a message, aren't we? We want to tell them this is what our country thinks, or this is what we want to share with you about our country. So I just gave you the part before that just said we're Christ's ambassadors. But let me give you the full context. God is reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them, and he's committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So, I want you to think of this again as a metaphor. So we're an ambassador, and we're in the middle of a terrible war, and we come to the enemy capital, and we say, we have a message for you. So what's the message as far as Christianity goes? What about this war? Is the message this war continues and we're going to drive you into the ground? 2 times in that section, Paul said a key word or a form of the word, reconciliation. What a great message. You go to an enemy capital, there's been warfare, there's been terrible problems, and you go up to them and you say, I'm bringing you peace. I have peace terms here. We can end this war. So now I'm sure the other side would say, so what are the conditions? And you say, there are no conditions. Total grace we are offering you. Complete cessation of this war. It's all over with. You just have to agree to it. What's the catch? There's no catch. It's free, above board, everything's okay, sign it, the war's over, defenses come down, life is restored, things are good again. That's our message, isn't it, as Christians? There's a war out there. There's a struggle that people have with God. Paul in other places said people are suppressing the truth. They know the truth. They're living a life of shaking their fist in God's face. It doesn't have to be that way. That's what's so wonderful about being an ambassador. We're bringing good news. We're not just carrying on a war, well this, well that. We're saying, no, we can end this thing. So we are Christ's ambassadors. I hope we think about that this week. Just some resources. Again, as I said, I've got complete notes on today's work if you want to see more of those book titles and things like that. You can go to my website. That's why I'm doing some of the videos and things like that. I've got videos and audios there, apologeticsforlife.org. I'll be glad to send you a 2-page list or even a more complete, just say you want the more complete list of resources by area. So I've got good magazines. I've got good websites. I've got areas dealing with the Bible. I've got areas dealing with Jesus. I've got areas dealing with world religions. Good books, good websites, anything that you would like to have to encourage you as far as your faith or sharing it with other people. And then our EFCC Apologetics webpage as well has all sorts of things from different speakers, not just me, that I hope you get some value out of.